I will actually be talking about low-income residents and their access to renewable energy. My name is Kathleen Coulter, and I am not an expert by any means. I saw that we do have grid alternative people here who probably know a lot more about this than I do, but I have been working on a fairly interesting research project, so I will be talking a bit about that tonight. Just to give you some background about me, my name is Kathleen Coulter. I am in my 4th year of law school, which is a bit unusual as law is normally a 3-year program. I have been working on a dual law degree with the University of Alberta in Canada, which means I'll end up graduating with a law degree from Canada and the United States. I have been very interested since coming back to school in cross-border environmental issues, and hopefully that will lead to a job, but as you may have noticed, I did raise my hand when I said I am looking for work, so that is to be determined. I have had some fairly interesting experiences with climate change and renewable energy, so when it comes to Q&A, feel free to ask about any of that in addition to the research that I've been doing. The pictures here on the left is a picture of me in the Marshall Islands after I graduated from my undergraduate program. I spent a year teaching in Woodimech, a small community in the Republic of the Marshall Islands in the South Pacific, which is when I became initially very interested in climate change and climate change policy. While I was living there, I witnessed firsthand a lot of the really critical effects of climate change, and that really impacted me. The host family I was living with was able to actually show me where the shoreline was now and where it had been 20 years ago when my host father was a younger man. And it was extraordinary how far the water had come up onto the shore, because you're talking in this community about very small islands. The island that I lived on was a square mile large, and so they really can't afford to lose land. In addition to that, there was really extreme weather patterns, and water was becoming salinated, so they were no longer able to take advantage of wells they had in the past. So things are becoming very difficult in that part of the world. And that is what inspired me when I came to law school to really focus on renewable energies and climate change law and policy. The photograph on the right is from several years ago. In 2013, I had the opportunity to be a youth delegate at the 2013 COP in Warsaw. And that was actually a really exciting experience, what's photographed here. I was able to work with several other youth delegates that I met while I was there, and we organized a virtual discussion with the youth envoy, oh gosh, what was his title? The envoy for youth for the UN director, some really long, complicated title, but he was a very wonderful man, very engaged, and very excited to get youth involved in the climate change response. And what I mean by virtual discussion is I actually reached out to Girl Guiding and Girl Scouting members who I was representing there all around the world, and we had a number of groups come in and get involved through both Google Groups and YouTube, and they were able to ask questions of Ahmed. And that was pretty exciting to be able to get our membership involved, although they weren't able to attend. I also am working on the RACI, the Renewable and Sustainable Energy Institute certificate while I'm here. So I've been able to take advantage of some pretty interesting experiences during my time in law school. I have done some volunteer work with the EPA out of Denver, the Governor's Climate and Forests Task Force right out of the law school here, and I'm really excited about what's going to happen next when I graduate. A quick overview of what I'll be talking about today. I want to give a little bit of background on low-income residents and energy poverty, as well as their access to renewable energy. And then I'll dive into the actual research project that I've been working on since the fall that initially started as part of a class project for my RAISY energy policy class. And I'll be going through the programs and next steps that we have in mind for that. So why low income? Because that is the big question. Low income households are the most at risk from climate change and the major negative aspects of fossil fuels, but they are also the least likely able to take advantage of cleaner energies. Lower income households spend a higher percentage of their income on energy costs. I came across all kinds of different stats ranging anywhere from 13 to 1/3% of their income might go towards the costs of energy, which is extraordinarily high compared to the average household, which can be as low as 6 to 3% of their income. In a George Washington University report, the 49.1 million households that earn less than $40,000 of income per year make up 40% of all U.S. households, but they only account for less than 5% of solar installations. So it is very clear that the vast majority of low-income households are not able to access solar energy. In addition to that, low-income households are typically far less energy efficient, so that raises the cost of energy as well for them. They're more likely to be both low-income and more racially diverse communities and people of color are more likely to be near power generation, which leads to all kinds of health issues, including asthma and cancer. And as I said, these communities are also the most impacted by extreme weather and climate change. I did actually come across an interesting report that confirmed that solar installation does in fact help residents in multifamily housing lower their bills. A project in California, one of the residents from this project of the City Heights Community Development Corporation, he quoted, "City Heights is a low-income area surrounded by freeways. The residents in my building have benefited from on-site solar installations at our 43-unit apartment buildings over the last 2 years. My energy bills used to be $75 to $90 a month, and now they've dropped to $20 to $24 a month." So the sad truth is that although they are the least likely to actually have access to these renewable energies, they do stand to benefit the most. Which all does connect us to energy poverty as well. Energy poverty in a nutshell is the idea of people not having access to electricity or power. Poor people are the least likely to have access to power. They are also less likely to remain poor if they are unconnected. Or more likely to remain poor if they are unconnected, 40 million Americans today face energy poverty. Here in Colorado, more than 13% of Coloradans live below the federal poverty line, while 6% of that actually lives in deep poverty, which means that's less than 50% below the poverty line, which is quite extreme. I found a number of statistics that were horrifying, actually. In the United States, at least 700,000 households reported in 2013 that they were uncomfortably cold for 24 hours or more in the winter because of the cost of heating. In 2008, Xcel Energy estimated that it will shut off 47,000 Colorado customers for delinquent bills during the second and third quarters of that year. I wasn't able to find any statistics for later than 2008, but it's important to note that Colorado is one of the few cold weather states that doesn't have temperature-related restrictions on shutoffs. which does mean that if certain people don't pay their bills and it's the extreme winter, Xcel still is able to shut off their power.
Aren't they responsible by nature? Xcel? That's what it claims.
Oh. I wouldn't know. I wouldn't be able to answer that. Not actually working for Xcel.
That's their take on it.
But I've had some difficulty reaching out to Xcel, which we'll get to later in the presentation. Between 750 and 32,000 Coloradans die prematurely each year due to energy poverty. Ironically, I found that quote in an article about a attorney, David Schnarr, for E&E Legal, who is actually petitioning the Supreme Court about whether Colorado could constitutionally, whether Colorado could constitutionally place manufacturing requirements on electricity that came from out of the state into Colorado. So this whole idea of extraterritorial regulation, because of course they have this mandate on renewable energy. But it's interesting that he was using this argument to kind of really support his side. But in fact, it really does show that, thank you for that. It really does show that there needs to be much more attention to providing low-income households with access to renewable energy. In addition to that, there are any number of reports showing that this whole argument that you see from the fossil fuels side, including coal, about how coal is cheaper energy and that's really going to help these low-income people, is just really not a fair argument. Since the mid-2000s, hundreds of coal-fired power plants have been canceled and many more have been retired. Coal is becoming more expensive to produce because it is becoming less and less accessible to actually find and mine. It's more costly, dirty, and there is a lower than historic demand. So it's really not the way of the future at all. But that's still kind of a great statistic that so many people are dying, and there needs to be more attention paid to that. There wasn't any more background on how exactly they're dying, but I would imagine that certainly a large percentage of that comes from not being able to pay heating bills during the winter. So that brings us to how can we actually get low-income communities access to renewable energy? And there are a number of different ways. I came across three main ones, and group discount programs and affordable leases both kind of go under the heading of rooftop solar, as opposed to community solar installations, which is the main focus of the research project that I'll get into in a few minutes. Group discount programs is the idea that a group of house owners can purchase a solar system together and select one contractor to come in and install all these systems at a lower rate because you're bringing a higher number of consumers together, although each participant has their own contract with the installer. Another way it can be done is the solar panels are bought directly from the manufacturer in bulk, and again, they'll get a group discount, and the participants can then actually install them themselves. Affordable leases, of course, there are any number of ways, including tax incentives, that allow more affordable solar leasing. And it certainly has been effective for more mid-income families, I would think. Leasing companies may leverage incentives and also negotiate with banks to provide favorable leasing terms. There's a company based out of Louisiana that has had a really high success rate with this. But community solar in my and my two colleagues, who unfortunately weren't able to be here tonight, In our opinion, community solar was really the most exciting and potentially successful option in that it could be more inclusive. Low-income families are often barred from renewable energy because they may not own their own homes, and they may have very low credit scores, which keep them from leases or keep them from other kinds of programs. But credit scores are often not taken into account in community solar. In addition to that, the actual price difference is extreme. The average cost of rooftop solar in Colorado runs from $20,000 to $30,000. Solar gardens, on the other hand, allow residents to buy in for as little as $3,700. So that's only a small fraction of the cost of rooftop solar. The idea of community solar, of course, is that a developer installs solar panels on empty land, like the picture in here, and you would just buy in a share. Individuals lease certain parts, pay a monthly fee, and then they may get a check back or credit applied directly to their utility bill. Which then brings us to the actual research project I've been working on. As I mentioned, this actually started as a class research project for an energy policy class I was taking with Professor Adam Reed out of Racey. And I have two partners that are continuing to work on it with me. Technically, our class project ended in December, but we had little to no results as of December, and we were still very interested in the topic and decided to carry on throughout the spring. Again, neither of them could be here today, but they are all both very interested in it. It's kind of exciting, too, because I'm a law student, and one of them is a PhD candidate, and the other is an MBA student. So it's been exciting to get a different perspective on the issue from three different students. So our original purpose was we were working with both our professor and our client. Each project had a client that they were working on to answer a question, and our client was actually NREL. And NREL was interested in finding out for sure through data whether community solar was in fact more successful at bringing in low-income subscribers than rooftop solar and other more innovative financing incentives. And initially, we actually thought this would be very easy to discover. Thought, oh, well, there's got to be all kinds of data out there. It's just going to be a matter of making a couple phone calls. And that turned out not to be the case at all. People are extremely reticent to give much of anything. We found most people actually felt pretty challenged by us, which is a little disturbing. We started out by actually contacting a large number of third-party solar companies that are actually out there installing these gardens and installing rooftop. And most of them said they didn't want to give us anything for business privacy reasons. So at that point, we knew that we needed to come at this from a different angle because we really weren't getting anywhere. So what we found is we came across legislation in Colorado that does actually require that a certain amount of community solar garden power go to low-income subscribers. It was introduced in June 2010. Part of the legislative purpose was to encourage ownership for low-income customers, and each qualifying retail utility, which in Colorado is both Excel and Black Hill, which is based out of Pueblo, must actually set forth in their plan a proposal for including these low-income customers. Now, very recently, actually in the last month, we were able to get a hold of Claire Levy, who was the legislator who actually wrote this bill. She's currently working for the Colorado Law and Policy Center, I believe. And she was lovely and actually gave us a lot of background information on writing the bill, but she has not been involved in implementation at all. So she wasn't really able to help us with our actual research question, but she was able to tell us a little bit more about the original purpose. The idea was to allow more portable access to solar power. Interestingly, it was not initially directed at low-income subscribers. That kind of came about organically when they were really looking at renters. And obviously, a large number of low-income are also renters. And so because the two kind of overlapped, it became a part of the bill. We then looked at the regulations that were passed by the PUC to implement this act. And again, within the actual regulations, that's where they state that at least 5% of renewable energy purposes must come from eligible low-income subscribers. I have a lot of random data, but it's a little boring and technical, so I might not go into it. One interesting thing I will mention is there was a minimum requirement of how much a subscriber had to purchase from a community solar garden, and within the regulations they exempt low-income subscribers from that. So there is no minimum for low income. They can purchase as little as they would like. So the idea really was to make it more accessible to them. So we then looked more at the utilities that would be actually carrying this out. And Excel has this Solar Rewards community program that kind of governs this whole idea. And the infograph basically just kind of gives you the idea of where community solar garden power goes to. 5% of it is supposed to go to low-income subscribers. Excel purchases the electricity from the solar gardens, and the subscribers are then sent a monthly check. And that then brings us to, well, what does that all mean? And I came across this fun quote saying that, oh yes, the solar gardens are making the market accessible to a whole lot more people. But in all of our research, we hadn't been able to find any proof that that is in fact true. There's a lot of information out there about the act, about the programs implementing it, but there's nothing that actually shows how many people are able to take advantage of this, which is a little disturbing because it should actually be public information. So at this point, we were getting towards the end of the semester, and we were really interested in what was actually going on, and were people actually able to take advantage of this program, and were low-income subscribers actually getting power? And we revised our questions. Who was responsible for tracking these subscribers? What measures were in place to enforce it? And is the legislation actually being upheld? But why does that matter? Well, the Colorado government did pave the way for increased community solar through the 2010 legislation. Colorado was the first state to actually put RPS standards into place. They are incredibly innovative, and they have done a lot for renewable energy, which is really exciting. Today, there are community solar gardens in more than a dozen Colorado cities, and PUCs are looking to establish similar community garden programs in California, the District of Columbia, Hawaii, and Maryland. But the act did purport to reach more low-income utility customers, and we have yet to actually find any proof that it's succeeded in that. And it's very difficult to answer a question of, are community solar gardens more successful in reaching a certain demographic if you can't find any data actually tracking it to show that. Otherwise, we're all just kind of speculating. And as I've learned from my PhD friends, you can't really speculate in science. That's not so helpful. So we are still looking into that. Public records, within the actual regulations, we found these quotes that contracts signed by the qualified retail utilities with community solar garden owners shall be a matter of public record. So again, this should be actually accessible to us. CSG subscriber organizations shall also issue these public annual reports at the end of the calendar year. And it's entirely possible that this information is technically public and available on some obscure website and very difficult to find. But after a number of months of research, we have yet to find any data proving how many low-income residents subscribe to community solar gardens. And we've looked at a number of different databases. So even if the information is out there, it's incredibly inaccessible to the public. Now, we have also for a while been trying to reach out to Excel, and after several months of harassing them, we were able to get in touch with Sean Queenan, who is a marketing assistant with the Solar Rewards program. And he told us just last week that Excel does in fact track community solar generation. He told us that most companies are just over the 5% requirement because they want to stay in compliance, which is great. In addition to that, Excel can actually turn off the garden if they fall out of compliance, but that has never happened. And he said that he would provide us some data proving this. Initially, he encouraged us to just take the number of power generated and multiply it by 5% because that would give us the number. And I had to explain to him, well, that doesn't actually prove anything. So once he finally understood that, he said, oh, okay, well, I'll look and try to email you something. So actually this afternoon, I got an email back from him, which is kind of exciting. And he did give us everything that's listed here. It was just presented exactly like this in an email. So it's a little perturbing that it's not an official document to report. And I'm not sure that we're quite done yet because that really is what we were looking for. But it is definitely a lot farther than we've come since we started this project back in September. So it is exciting to see that according to Sean Queenan at Excel, there are so much kilowatts, 833,000 kilowatts allocated right now to low-income subscriptions. So we can take that for what it is. But we do intend, of course, to continue looking into this. And we do have some next steps, which include continue attempts to reach Bill Dalton of the PUC. We've been trying to reach members of the PUC for a number of months as well, and that's been difficult. And Kevin Cray of Excel Energy, who's actually in charge of the Solar Rewards program. It's also been difficult to reach him. I'd had a phone interview scheduled that he was then not able to make, which is how I ended up talking to Sean Queenan. We have spoken with Joy Hughes of the Solar Gardens Institute, and she hopes to collaborate with us. We also will be meeting with Professor Adam Reed to look at next steps. We've also actually, just as of a couple days ago, one of my colleagues spoke with Jim Hartman, who's really heavily involved with Colorado Renewable Energy through both the CEC and Hartman Eli Investments. And he gave us some contacts at the CEC and encouraged us to continue to reach out to Kevin Cray at Excel. Really, our end goal what we really hoped to do was create some sort of infographic that actually showed how low-income subscribers were benefiting from the Act, with any kind of results that we could then publish to encourage other regions to embrace similar community solar initiatives. That's very difficult to do without data. We now have some. We are still hoping to find something slightly more official, but that is where we are right now. Of course, it's also necessary to build awareness for low-income communities themselves. That is a major problem beyond them actually being able to afford to buy into community solar. It's simple awareness, or unawareness rather, of existing programs. Many low-income communities might be wary of getting involved with government agencies. Many are actually a little wary of taking on energy that's even free that companies are giving away in order to attract that 5%. They may be also unwilling to take on a lot of the considerable paperwork that comes with applying for weatherization or other available resources. So in addition to creating an infographic that would hopefully attract more enthusiasm for community solar initiatives, we were hoping to put something together that would then also be able to be used to inform and build awareness to low-income communities themselves. So that is pretty much where we were at right now.